The captain collapsed during landing. His body went limp, his hand slipped from the controls, and the plane dropped through a storm. The young co-pilot was alone, seconds from the runway. Then, in seat 14C, a quiet woman stood up, walked to the cockpit, and whispered, "I've flown Apache." Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. Flight 214 left Denver at 6 in the morning. The sky was gray and heavy with clouds, and a light rain tapped on the windows of the plane. Inside, 140 passengers settled into their seats. Most of them were tired. Some slept. Others read books or looked at their phones one last time before takeoff. In seat 14C sat a woman named Sarah Mitchell. She was 38 years old, dressed in a plain gray jacket and jeans. She carried a small backpack and a paperback book about growing vegetables in small gardens. She did not talk to anyone. She did not smile much. To anyone who looked at her, she was just another quiet passenger going home. Nobody on the plane knew that 6 years ago, Sarah had flown attack helicopters for the United States Army. Nobody knew she had once landed a damaged aircraft in the middle of a sandstorm with 2 wounded soldiers on board. Nobody knew, because she never told anyone. She had left the army after a mission that went wrong in a place called Kandahar, and since then she had tried to live a normal, quiet life. She worked as a graphic designer. She grew tomatoes on her balcony. She wanted to forget the sky. The plane took off smoothly. Captain James Riley, a man with 22 years of flying experience, guided the aircraft up through the clouds. Beside him sat First Officer Jennifer Cole, only 29 years old and new to this aircraft type. It was only her 3rd month flying this route. Captain Riley liked her. He often told her that she asked good questions and that she would be a fine captain herself one day. For the first 2.5 hours, the flight was calm. The plane cruised at 37,000 feet. Passengers ate small breakfasts. Flight attendants pushed their carts down the aisle. Sarah read her gardening book and looked out the window at the clouds below, thinking about nothing in particular. As the plane began its descent toward the airport, dark clouds gathered ahead. The captain announced a slightly bumpy approach and asked everyone to fasten their seatbelts. The plane began to lose altitude steadily, moving down through the layers of cloud, lining up for the final approach into the runway. Then, without warning, everything changed. Just as Captain Riley reached for the controls to guide the plane down through the last stage of the landing, he suddenly gripped the armrest of his seat. His face turned pale, then gray. A sharp pain spread across his chest and down his left arm. He tried to speak to Jennifer, but the words came out broken and confused. "Jennifer, something's wrong," he managed to say, before his hand slipped from the controls and his head fell forward, right in the middle of the descent, only minutes from the runway. Jennifer's heart jumped. She had never seen anything like this before. She called his name, but he did not answer. She checked him quickly and realized he was breathing, but only weakly, and his skin was cold and wet with sweat. It was clear that Captain Riley was having a heart attack. Jennifer pressed the intercom button with a shaking hand. "This is First Officer Cole. Is there a doctor on board? We need medical help in the cockpit immediately." The comm cabin turned into chaos. Flight attendants moved quickly through the aisles. A passenger who was a nurse rushed forward to help the captain, laying him down as gently as possible in the small space behind the pilot's seat, checking his pulse, preparing to start basic first aid. But there was a much bigger problem. Jennifer now had to fly the plane alone, and outside the small oval windows, the weather had turned dangerous. Dark clouds rolled in fast. Lightning flashed in the distance. The plane began to shake as it entered a storm system that had not been forecast just an hour earlier. Rain hammered against the windshield. Strong winds pushed the aircraft sideways, and Jennifer fought to keep it steady. She had trained for emergencies, but nothing had prepared her for this. She was alone, flying a commercial jet through a storm, with an unconscious captain beside her, only a few thousand feet above the ground, with the runway still hidden somewhere ahead in the rain. Back in the cabin, passengers felt the plane shake violently. Overhead bins rattled. A woman screamed as her drink spilled across her lap. A child began to cry. Fear spread through the cabin like a wave. An older man sitting near the front tried to calm the people around him, telling them to breathe slowly and trust the crew. A young flight attendant named Rosa moved down the aisle with a steady voice, repeating the same words again and again. "We are going to be fine. Please keep your seatbelts fastened and stay calm." Inside, her own hands were trembling, but she did not let it show on her face. Passengers gripped their armrests. Some prayed quietly. Others held hands with the stranger sitting beside them, united for a moment by the same fear. Near the back of the plane, a mother pulled her small daughter close and whispered that the shaking was just like a big truck driving over bumpy road, nothing more. The little girl nodded, though her eyes were wide and unsure. Around them, the storm outside pressed against the aircraft, rain streaking sideways across the windows, the wingtips disappearing and reappearing through the thick gray clouds. That is when Sarah Mitchell closed her gardening book. She had noticed the change in the engine sound before anyone else. She had felt the small shift in altitude before the seatbelt light even turned on. Years of training do not disappear, even when a person tries to forget them. Her body reacted before her mind did. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. A flight attendant tried to stop her. "Ma'am, please sit down, we are asking everyone to remain seated." "I need to speak with the flight crew right now," Sarah said. Her voice was calm, but firm, the kind of voice that made people listen without knowing why. "Tell them a former military pilot is on board." The flight attendant hesitated, but something in Sarah's eyes made her turn and hurry toward the cockpit door. A minute later, Sarah stood at the cockpit entrance. Jennifer glanced back for half a second, her eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. Sarah leaned in close, her voice low and steady, almost a whisper, so as not to add to the panic already filling the small space. "I've flown Apache," she said quietly. "My name is Sarah Mitchell. 11 years, United States Army. I've handled emergency landings before. Let me help you." Jennifer wanted to argue, wanted to say this was against every rule she had ever learned, but the plane shook hard again, dropping suddenly before leveling out. She had no better option. "Get in," Jennifer said. "Please." Sarah moved carefully into the cockpit and took the empty seat where a jump seat usually folded down. She studied the instruments for a moment, her eyes moving quickly across dials and screens that, though different from a helicopter cockpit, still spoke a language she understood. "Talk to me," Sarah said. "Altitude, speed, fuel, and tell me what air traffic control has said." Jennifer explained everything in short, quick sentences. They were at 11,000 feet, already lined up for the approach, only a few minutes from the runway, flying through a storm with strong crosswinds. The captain was unresponsive. Air traffic control had already been notified of the emergency and was helping guide them down to the same airport they had already been planning to land at, though the storm had grown much worse in the last few minutes. "Okay," Sarah said. "You are doing fine. You have kept this plane in the air, which is the hardest part. Now we bring it down safely, together." Sarah did not take over the controls completely. She understood that Jennifer needed to fly the plane herself, with guidance, not have it taken away from her. This was important, both for the moment and for Jennifer's confidence afterward. "Watch your airspeed," Sarah said as the plane dropped through 9,000 feet. "You're over-controlling the yoke. Small movements. Let the aircraft breathe." Jennifer adjusted, and the ride became slightly smoother. Lightning flashed again, closer this time, lighting up the cockpit in a flash of white. Thunder rumbled so loud they could hear it over the engines. The plane hit a pocket of turbulence that threw them both against their harnesses. "Steady," Sarah said, her voice never rising. Steady. You have this. At 8,000 feet, the airport runway lights appeared through the rain, faint and far away. The wind was blowing hard from the side, pushing against the plane's path. Crosswind landing, Sarah said. Nose slightly into the wind. Let the wing dip a little on the windward side. Don't fight the wind completely, work with it. Jennifer's hands were shaking, but she followed every instruction. Sweat ran down her forehead despite the cool cabin air. Wait for it, Sarah said as the runway grew closer and closer, the ground rising up fast beneath them. Wait, now, level the wings, and ease power back, now. The wheels of the plane touched the runway hard, bounced once, then settled onto the wet concrete. The engines roared as the thrust reversers activated, slowing the aircraft down. Rain streaked across the windshield as the plane rolled to a stop at the very end of the runway, brakes smoking slightly in the wet air. For a moment, nobody in the cockpit said anything. Jennifer's hands were still gripping the controls, her whole body shaking, tears mixing with the sweat on her face. We're down, she whispered. We're actually down. You did that, Sarah said quietly. Not me. You flew this plane. I just talked. Emergency vehicles were already waiting on the runway. Paramedics rushed onto the plane and carried Captain Riley out on a stretcher, rushing him to a nearby hospital. Passengers were guided off the plane, shaken but safe, many of them crying, some of them clapping as they walked past the cockpit, though they did not fully understand yet what had happened inside. News of the emergency landing spread quickly. A passenger had filmed part of the landing from their phone, capturing the moment the wheels hit the runway and the plane rolled safely to a stop. Within hours, the video and the story were everywhere online. Reporters wanted to know who the mysterious woman was who had walked into the cockpit and helped land the plane. At first, Sarah tried to avoid the attention. She gave her statement to the airline and to investigators, then tried to quietly leave the airport. But a reporter recognized something in the way she spoke about altitude and airspeed, and asked directly, "Were you military?" Sarah paused, then finally nodded. "I flew Apache helicopters. 11 years. 2 tours." The reporter asked to see identification, more out of surprise than suspicion. Sarah reached into her small backpack and pulled out an old, worn military identification card. It read, Major Sarah Chun Mitchell, United States Army. The story exploded across news channels and social media within a day. People wanted to know everything about the quiet woman in seat 14C who had turned out to be a decorated military pilot. But the story did not stay simple for long. Journalists digging into Sarah's military record found something else, something that had been buried for years. Her final mission in Kandahar had ended in controversy. Official records said equipment failure caused the crash that ended her military flying career and injured several soldiers under her command. But new information began to surface, including statements from soldiers who had been there that day, claiming that a senior officer, General Mark Brennan, had ignored weather warnings and ordered the mission to continue despite Sarah's objections, then later blamed the crash entirely on her to protect his own career. Sarah had never spoken publicly about this before. She had accepted the blame quietly and left the army rather than fight a battle she believed she could not win against a powerful general. But now, with cameras and reporters suddenly interested in her story, the soldiers who had served with her began coming forward on their own, telling the truth about what really happened that day in Kandahar. An official investigation was reopened. Documents were reviewed. Statements were compared. Slowly, the truth came out. General Brennan had indeed ignored the weather warning that day, and had indeed shifted the blame onto Sarah afterward to avoid damage to his own record. Sarah was formally cleared of any wrongdoing, and her military record was corrected to reflect what had actually happened. For Sarah, this was not really about revenge. It was about finally being able to stop hiding. For years she had believed she had failed as a pilot, failed the soldiers under her care, and that belief had made her want to disappear into an ordinary, quiet life. Now she understood that she had not failed at all. She had done everything right, and the failure had belonged to someone else. In the months after the incident, Sarah's life changed in ways she never expected. The airline thanked her publicly and awarded her a lifetime of free flights, which she found a little funny given that she had once tried so hard to avoid attention on planes. Jennifer, the young first officer, stayed in close contact with her, and the two became close friends. Jennifer often said that Sarah had not only helped her land a plane that day, but had also taught her how to stay calm under pressure, a lesson she carried into the rest of her flying career. Sarah eventually left her job as a graphic designer. With some encouragement from Jennifer and a few of the soldiers she had once commanded, she started a small training center for pilots, both civilian and military, focused on emergency decision-making and staying calm during crisis situations. It was not a large business, just a modest building near a small airfield, but it gave her a sense of purpose she had not felt in years. Some of the soldiers she had served with in Kandahar came to visit her at the training center. They shook her hand, some of them hugged her, and thanked her for finally letting the truth come out, even though she had not asked for any of the attention that made it possible. Jennifer visited often, too. On slow afternoons, she would sit with Sarah on the small porch outside the training center, drinking coffee and talking about flying, about fear, about the strange way one storm could change two lives forever. Jennifer eventually earned her captain's stripes 2 years later, and the first thing she did after her promotion ceremony was call Sarah to thank her again, the same way she had thanked her on that rainy runway. Captain Riley recovered fully after his heart attack, though doctors told him his flying days were over. He did not mind as much as people expected. He visited Sarah's training center once, walked through the small classroom where new pilots practiced emergency decisions, and told her quietly that he was glad his last flight had ended the way it did, with the plane down safely and everyone alive, even if it meant handing control to someone he had never met before that day. She still kept her gardening book. She still grew tomatoes on her balcony, though now it was a balcony attached to a small office near the airfield instead of an apartment far from the sky. Sometimes, in the evenings, she would sit outside and watch small planes take off and land in the distance, and she no longer looked away from them the way she used to. The woman who had once tried so hard to be invisible was not invisible anymore. But she was, in her own way, at peace. She had spent years running from the sky, believing that flying had taken something from her. In truth, it had simply been waiting for her to come back to it, on her own terms, when she was ready. The quiet woman in seat 14C was gone. In her place was someone who had finally stopped hiding from who she really was.